line.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean Callebs reporting live in Wilmington, North Carolina, where the remnants of Florence continue to hit this area in extremely punishing fashion. It actually came to shore, gosh, more than 14 hours ago. The eye actually came ashore more than 14 hours ago, yet this storm is still packing tropical force winds and really hitting not just the coastal areas, but further inland in North Carolina and South Carolina along the South Atlantic United States. Sadly, we know that this storm right now is also a killer. At least 4 people are dead. The first 2 casualties that were released, a mother and an infant who were crushed when a tree fell on their house at the height of the storm. There have been a number of emergency operations that rescue teams had to go out. The most serious is a town called New Bern, North Carolina, about 120 kilometers to the north of us, early in the morning. Before the eye actually made it, that's a town that's right on a riverside. It got completely swamped. The storm surge was expected to be about 4 meters, roughly twice my size. People got trapped in their homes. We know that emergency authorities told them, stay where you are, get to the highest point possible, and quote, we will get to you. And they were apparently able to rescue all 150 to 200 people who were trapped in that area. In terms of knocking out electricity, this storm has been has had quite the knockout punch. At least 750,000 homes right now are without power, and it could be days, even weeks before the electricity is restored. Firstly, where we are, power went out, and the crews can't even begin to try and restore power until these hurricane-like conditions begin to subside. We're actually in a little area, we're kind of protected by a roof here, as you can see. In the spirit of full disclosure, I can tell you we actually took another TV news crew's spot when they stopped working for the night. But if I step out here just a little bit, and Pete, you could probably stop right there, Peter, you can see that the rain is still coming down. And that is what Florence is going to be remembered for. It is going to be a soaking storm. It is moving so slowly, somewhere between 5 and 6 kilometers per hour. Now, usually when a hurricane or tropical storm makes landfall, it begins to move very rapidly, one, and secondly, it begins to dissipate. This is a very broad storm. At one point, before it made landfall, it was a Category 4 hurricane, a very dangerous hurricane. And even though it lost a lot of its wind speed, it more than made up for that in breadth. And that is what is concerning authorities. The North Carolina governor, coming out a short time ago, telling people that this storm in many ways is just beginning. The coastal areas they knew would flood, but now as it moves slowly inward and sets over areas and just saturates them with water, more and more flooding is going to take place. The crews have also been The emergency folks have been very blunt with people, saying this is going to be a dangerous storm. They urged them to get out ahead of this. Sadly, some people didn't. When we've heard from people who rode out the storm last night, and they talked about just how terrifying it was. Where we are, I'm on the 9th floor of a hotel. That's the top floor. It actually felt like the roof was being ripped off last night. The window was wobbling, and you could actually feel the hotel sway somewhat. And that was only a Category 1 hurricane. Now, the building codes along the coastline in the United States are very rigid. This actually changed way back in 1991 after Hurricane Andrew came through and causing just widespread death and destruction. Authorities really stiffened the building codes, and you can go through after a storm and see which structure was built before Hurricane Andrew, which one was built after Hurricane Andrew. A major concern is going to be the barrier islands. Everybody wants to live close to the water. It's a beautiful location. It's a wonderful opportunity to experience life, enjoy the beach, but it also brings its dangers, and the barrier islands are the ones that get hit the worst with the storm surge. As I mentioned, the storm surge was supposed to be somewhere around 4 meters. That's 12 feet tall. So that is basically about a floor and a half of a building. So as the storm surge came in, it just took everything out. And what we're seeing is hurricanes come with a counterclockwise spin. Now earlier, we're very close to what is called, we're very close to a river that's flowing obviously into the ocean. But as that storm came back in the Cape Fear River, it actually began pushing back up and changed the flow of the river. That's how powerful the storm was, and that is leading to a lot of low-lying flooding as well. A tremendous amount of concern for what this storm has done and for what it is going to do. Authorities saw it coming for such a long time. They warned people, they cautioned people to get out of the way, to do what they can to take care of themselves. But there are people who, for various reasons, whether they want to protect their property, whether they have no place to go, and we heard some people saying that they didn't want to evacuate, even though there were thousands of shelters open, because they couldn't take their pets. So a lot of people wanted to stay with their pets as well. And today, as I mentioned, people are talking about just how terrifying it was. Some saying they thought their house was going to be simply splintered at the height of the storm. Now, this is going to move further and further inland. To the south of us, South Carolina, the capital of Columbia, sometime on Sunday, about 36 hours from now, that city is expected to get hit hard with punishing rainfall. Furthermore, to the west, at Georgia, the capital Atlanta, it is going to get hit as well. So there are a lot of cities that people internationally are going to know about that are going to be experiencing these kind of tropical force winds and the kind of rainfall that has brought so much flooding to this area. We've been out and seen pictures and all the coastal areas, trees simply overburdened. There are limbs scattered virtually everywhere. And that's the real danger of this, because at the height of the storm, or the winds going close to 150, 160 kilometers per hour, anything that gets picked up is tossed like a missile. There's one picture we saw where a piece of wood actually stuck into the side of a tree where it was shot like a projectile. Where we are, windows were simply shattered by the force from the winds, and this is a very solid, rugged structure, so you can imagine what people are facing in and around us. But the big concern moving forward, the big concern moving now, is the flooding. And if anybody decided to try and ride this storm out as best as possible, and then maybe think, okay, I've got to get out of this, I'm worried about our family situation, they may go down what appears to be a flooded road, but that road may be gone. That's what authorities are cautioning people about tonight. It's something that they've been talking about time and time again. The eye of the storm moved over Wilmington, North Carolina at 7:15 Eastern time. That was close to 13 and a half hours ago. And the rain is still coming down. The winds are still hitting us. It's amazing the power of this storm. Usually a storm that comes through, you'll ride it out for a few hours, you'll get that wind for a short time, it does its damage, then it begins to splinter. Then the concern becomes the possibility of spawning tornadoes further inland. But this storm just continues to lumber along in a very slow fashion, bringing so much rain. And so much of the eastern United States has been prepared for something like this. They try to do everything they can. They have emergency officials in place. The federal, state, and local governments are supposed to work very closely with each other. But obviously, this storm comes the same week the controversy around Hurricane Maria, which punished Puerto Rico just last year. A report coming out saying there were close to 3,000 deaths. And now Donald Trump issuing a tweet yesterday saying there weren't that many deaths, basically making this a political issue, saying that Democrats were trying to trumpet this issue to affect the midterm elections. That drew a tremendous amount of criticism on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, as well as just the rank and file citizens throughout the United States. Anybody would talk about using politics and the loss of life in the same sentence. So a lot of people are going to be watching to see how Trump's administration, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, does in trying to get people to this entity to find housing for those who lost their houses, to try and find a way to rebuild for those who don't have the proper insurance. And it's going to happen. People who live in a floodplain are mandated to have flood insurance, but other areas that simply don't flood, you're not required to have flood insurance. So there's some people who may think, well, we've never been flooded before, so let's not deal with it now. But we've seen that happen in so many hurricanes in the past. Also, Trump is going to come down here next week. He says he wants to give the first responders time to do their job. You can see these winds can continue to whip, even though most of the time they're blowing in a very steady fashion. Every now and then they really gust like this. But as I was mentioning, Donald Trump is coming down here next week. He's going to talk about his administration's response to this storm, how people are doing. This is a massive storm. There are millions of people in the path of this storm. And as I mentioned, even though it's been coming for days, it's not over by a long shot. It's going to continue to drop rain and hit winds throughout the Carolinas, and it could move up and go into Virginia, the Washington, D.C. area. Who knows? These storms are fickle. That's one thing that authorities do know. But one thing they were absolutely correct on, they knew this was going to be a bad storm. They told people to be prepared. They told people to get out of the way. Lastly, the issue of gasoline is going to obviously be very critical in this area. So many gas stations right now are simply out of fuel, and it's going to be very difficult to get trucks in to be able to refill those service stations in the coming days. So you're going to see more and more frustration begin to build once this storm goes out, the heat settles in, people don't have electricity, they don't have food, they don't have water, they don't have fuel. The nightmare is just beginning for those who made it through this punishing storm. It is going to leave its mark, and in the end, it's pretty safe to say the damage is going to be totaled in billions of dollars. That's the very latest from Wilmington, North Carolina, where the eye of Hurricane Florence passed over at 7:15 in the morning. It has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, but as you can see, the rain, the wind continued to hit this area, and the damage, the danger is not over by a long shot. Reporting live in Wilmington, North Carolina, Sean Callebs, CGTN.